Well, former Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce's electorate takes in parts of the upper Hunter Valley, and he joins me now from Canberra. Thanks for joining us, Barnaby. This must be something that part of the world, the central coast of New South Wales, the Hunter Valley, really dreads over the next 5 or 6 years. If they shut down these large power stations, it's just going to be a bitter blow to those local economies.
Absolutely, Chris, and central Queensland and the Gippsland and the Illawarra. And what annoys me, Chris, is we had the censure motion today, and how many times did we hear the word transparency and openness and honesty and all the rhetoric from the Labor Party? Well, Chris, this is part of a Labor Party report. This is about the cost just to one very small section, the Upper Hunter. This, even in that small section, talks about a 6.7% increase in unemployment. It talks about tens of millions of dollars that is going to be taken out of the economy. It talks about a reduction in household income. But you know what it doesn't talk about? Well, it doesn't talk in the chamber because they've hidden it. And I imagine right now they're doing the tactics to bury it deeply. I don't know how. Maybe they'll put it in the National Security Committee or put some marginalia on it to try and hide it. But if Chris Bowen and Mr Albanese want to be honest with the Australian people, and especially for their member for Hunter, and what about the member for Shortland? And we'll look after the member for Capricornia, the member for Flynn, the member for Dawson, or the member for Gippsland. But they all want to know, like, we've got it for the Upper Hunter, and it wasn't just done for the Upper Hunter, it's done for all of them. Table the report. It was put together in October. It's obviously it was leaked to me, and I want to see the rest of it, as do you, as do the Australian people. Otherwise, spare me the piffle of your belief in transparency and not hiding things and making sure that you're open with anything, because they're not open with this.
And also promising those electors, those Labor electors, promising to them at the election that they did have a jobs plan for them, that they would do some transition where you not only lose coal-fired power, but you somehow boost green jobs. Where are those jobs?
Right, and they've got a plan. There's no doubt about it. They've got a plan. The plan is to kick them to the curb. That is the plan. The plan is spelled out in their own document. Unemployment and a loss of income. Now, let's just take them up on the so-called renewables, all these renewable jobs. You know, it's amazing. Well, I can tell you the coal towns, Chris, Biloela, Emerald, a large part of the economy of Gladstone, Singleton, Muswellbrook, Curry, Morwell, towns down in the Gippsland. But I'm trying to work out with all these jobs, where's the renewable town? Gosh, there'd have to be 3 or 4 of them, wouldn't there?
Well, reality
is in towns such as Glen Innes, which has massive renewables, no increase in employment. Once the contractors fly in, fly out, utilise the motels and the hotels, once they disappear, no jobs. But what you are left with is with high entropy power on the grid. A grid that needs to work at almost precisely 50 hertz. And if it's not working at 50 hertz, it collapses. You have a thing called blackouts. Now, you need low entropy powers, quality power. What renewables are is high entropy power. The difference being low entropy power is like letting the air out of the balloon through the mouthpiece. High entropy power is popping the balloon.
Yeah, well, reality is going to catch up with them eventually. There's no doubt about that, and we'll keep on these energy issues. But while I've got you, I've got to ask you about this debate regarding the Voice and the position taken by the Nationals this week. I want to show you now a clip, or let's listen to a clip of the former Indigenous Affairs Minister, Ken Wyatt, the Liberal Indigenous Affairs Minister during the Morrison government. Obviously, that you were Deputy Prime Minister of at times. Here's what Ken Wyatt had to say about the Nationals' position.
Now, I took this report to Cabinet twice. So people who were ministers at the time would be fully aware of this report, and what is obvious with the National Party is they have not read the report and have not given an Aboriginal voice to Parliament an opportunity to be aired and to be listened to and to be implemented.
So he's talking about this Voice, a report put together under the coalition government about a voice that was going to be legislated, not in the Constitution, but legislated. How can it be that all that work was done by the coalition saying that it could work, and yet David Littleproud says now that it can't work?
Well, we haven't seen. Look, we're at Christmas. We've had IR legislation come forward. We've had the integrity bills come forward. We've had so much time spent on a censure motion. We've had all the time in the world, and to have the details of what the Voice requires to be brought forward. I don't believe the piffle for 1 second that they don't have them. And you've been around long enough to realise that that wouldn't be the case either. They have them. We need to see them, and to have a cogent debate. And if you can't see them, you can't possibly say yes. But let's go to the
But I think that's a reasonable position, right? That's a reasonable position, and that's the position that your party and David Littleproud had up until this week. But instead of waiting for those details you're asking for and having that debate, you've now just checked out of it, saying you oppose the whole concept.
Well, I'll tell you what, for my part, is I believe that the issues pertinent to people in regional areas are not determined by the colour of their skin, but the circumstances in which they find them. And in many regional towns, Chris, you'll have a white family who identifies as white, next door to a family that identifies them as Indigenous, both living in exactly the same economic circumstances. And I don't quite know how to go to one house and explain to them that they can avail themselves of greater parliamentary representation than the other house when they're both in exactly the same, both living in exactly the same circumstances.
It's not greater parliamentary representation, though, is it? You're talking about them being involved in a advisory body on their issues.
But as you also know, Chris, and your listeners should be informed, when something goes into the Constitution, its interpretation is by the High Court, not the Parliament. Therefore, it's incredibly important that you have to be forensic about what you're putting in the Constitution.
Absolutely.
Your wishes in the Parliament are one thing. The interpretation of the High Court becomes an extension, a delineation, a diminution of what you might have suspected or what you might have hoped to have been the case.
And that's why that wording has to be so precise. But are you saying that that's beyond the wit of the Parliament?
What word? Yeah, but also in the Parliament, as we now know, it is dominated by the Labor and the Greens. Therefore, it'll be their wording, not the wording of the Parliament, but their wording. And quite obviously, we can see in other issues that we can't trust them. And one of the things we saw in this document right here that I just showed you on energy prices, that's also their approach to regional Australia, and it's not a good one. However, and I remember bringing it up in your program in the past, Chris, you might have been a little bit dismissive about it. I actually tabled the private members bill, here's a copy of it, bringing about regional senators. Regional senators which would overwhelmingly not be a voice to the Parliament, but a voice in the Parliament.
Yeah,
in the Parliament.
We've talked about it before. It's an even more radical idea. Yes.
You can do it. No, it's not. No, it's not. I'll take you up on that. This is actually in Part 2, in Chapter 2, Part 7 of our Constitution as it is. So it's not radical. It's actually there. And it actually says until the Parliament otherwise decides. So I don't understand how something that was done around about federation is deemed to be a radical addendum to the process of where we are now. And quite obviously, senators from the Cape or from the Gulf or from the Kimberley would be Indigenous, would be Aboriginal. And therefore, you would have to have the circumstances of political parties move towards the consideration of their issues to attract them to their political party.
I'm aware of the idea. We have discussed it before. I'm sorry, but we have to move on. I've got to get to my next guest. And that idea hasn't really developed a lot of traction.
Why? Why?
We'll get back to it. Barnaby Joyce, I've got to let you go. Thanks for joining us. Barnaby Joyce, the former Deputy Prime Minister. Yes, he has raised that idea with us before on this program. And we'll get back to it at some stage, I suppose, but not a lot of people seem to be supporting it.